Good afternoon. It is Saturday, 7/31/21, and we're back reading about 10 minutes a day from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And we're continuing in Chapter 18, Morris and Linda Tannehill from The Market for Liberty in 1970. And we'll start today's reading about two-thirds of the way down on page 252. So here we go. But the second factor, loss of reputation, would be even more damaging to the aggressor. Just as specialized companies would keep central files listing poor contractual skills, they would also list aggressors so that anyone wishing to do business with a man could first check his record. Insurance companies in particular would make use of this service. So our bank robber would find insurance companies listing him as a very poor risk and other firms reluctant to enter into contracts with him. Thus, if a man were foolish enough to engage in such a motivated action as this bank robbery, he would find that he had caused himself considerable expense and loss of valuable reputation, but had gained absolutely nothing. In a similar vein, it has been objected that a very rich man could afford to commit any number of coercive acts, since all he would lose would be a little of his vast fortune. It is a bit difficult to imagine such a mentally ill person being able to continue existing uncured and unchallenged in a predominantly rational culture. But assuming that he did, he would immediately find that his money was hardly the only loss his actions cost him. As soon as his career of aggression was recognized for what it was, no honest man would take the chance of having anything to do with him. The only individuals who would not avoid him like the plague would be those who felt they were tougher or craftier than he, and their only purpose in risking an association with him would be to part him from as large a share of his money as possible. Furthermore, he would run an immense risk of being killed by some victim acting in self-defense. Considering his reputation for aggression, a man would probably be justified in shooting him for any threatening gesture. So, in spite of his ability to pay, his life would be miserable and precarious, and his fortune would probably dwindle rapidly. Again, it has been said that if a man confined himself to thefts so petty that the recoverable amount would be smaller than the cost of recovering it, thus making prosecution of the case economically unfeasible, he could get away with a career of aggression of sorts. But such a bubblegum thief would lose much more than he could possibly gain, because he would lose his good reputation as his acts of aggression were discovered and recorded. In each of these incidents, it is obvious that the aggressor's loss of reputation would be at least as damaging as his financial loss, and that his lost reputation could not be regained unless he made reparations for his aggressive act and showed a determination to behave more reasonably in the future. He might shrug off the financial loss, but the loss of a good reputation would force him to live a substandard life, cut off from insurance protection, credit, reputable business dealings, and the friendship of all honest persons. All the foregoing objections to a monetary payment assume that it would not be sufficiently costly to deter aggression, or, in other words, that it is severity of punishment which deters aggression. The untruth of this assumption should be evident from an examination of such historical eras as Elizabethan England, in which punishments of extreme severity prevailed, including physical mutilation and hanging for petty theft. Yet in spite of the great loss of value imposed on criminals, crime rates were very high. The reason for this is that it is not severity, but justice which deters aggression. To punish the aggressor with more severity than his actions warrant, that is, to impose on him a greater loss of value than that which is necessary for him to make reasonable reparations to the victim, is to commit an injustice against him. Injustice cannot be a deterrent to injustice. The aggressor who is treated with such excessive severity feels, quite rightly, that he has been victimized. Seeing little or no justice in his punishment, he feels a vast resentment and often forms a resolve to, quote, get even with society as soon as possible. Thus, in dealing with aggression, excessive severity as much as excessive laxity can provoke further aggressive acts. The only valid answer to injustice is justice. Justice cannot be served by excessive severity or by taking revenge against the aggressor, or by pacifism, but only by requiring the aggressor to pay the debt which he has created by his coercive action. Dealing with a man justly helps him to improve himself and his life by inducing him to act in his own self-interest. In the case of an aggressor, justice induces him to want to and be able to live a productive, honest, non-coercive life, both while he is paying the debt he owes to his victim and afterwards. Justice helps a man get on the right track by sending him the right signals. It penalizes him for his misdeeds, but only as much as he actually deserves. It also rewards him when he does the right thing. Injustice sends out incorrect signals which lead men astray. The injustice of letting an aggressor get away without paying for his aggressions teaches him to believe that crime pays, which induces him to commit more and bigger crimes. The injustice of punishing an aggressor by making him pay more than he really owes the victim teaches the aggressor that he can't expect justice from others, so there's little point in trying to treat them justly. He concludes that this is a dog-eat-dog world and that his best course of action is to, quote, do it unto others before they do it unto him. Only justice sends the aggressor the right signals, so only justice can be a satisfactory deterrent to aggression. It may be objected that some men will attempt to take advantage of a free market system of dealing with aggression. This is true, as it is true of any other social system. But the big advantage of any action of the free market is that errors and injustices are self-correcting. Because competition creates a need for excellence on the part of each business, a free market institution must correct its errors in order to survive. Government, on the other hand, survives not by excellence, but by coercion. So an error or flaw in a governmental institution can, and usually will, perpetuate itself almost indefinitely, with its errors usually being, quote, corrected by further errors. Private enterprise must therefore always be superior to government in any field, including that of dealing with aggressors. Next section is titled Warring Defense Agencies and Organized Crime. Some opponents of a laissez-faire society have contended that because a governmentless society would have no single society-wide institution able to legitimately wield superior force to prevent aggression, a state of gang warfare between defense agencies would arise. Then, as they argue, brute force rather than justice would prevail, and society would collapse in internecine conflict. This contention assumes that private defense service entrepreneurs would find it to their advantage, at least in some circumstances, to use coercive rather than market means to achieve their ends. There is a further unstated assumption that governmental officials would not only prevent coercion, but would themselves consistently refrain from initiating force, or that the force they initiated would somehow be preferable to the chaos it is feared would result from an unhampered market. The second of these assumptions is obviously groundless, since government is a coercive monopoly which must initiate force in order to survive and which cannot be kept limited. But what of the first assumption? Would a free market system of value protection lead to gang warfare between the competing defense companies? The, quote, gang warfare objection has been raised in regard to theories advocating a system of competing governments. When applied to any type of governments, the objection is a valid one. A government being a coercive monopoly is always in the position of initiating force simply by the fact of its existence. So it is not surprising that conflicts between governments frequently take the form of war. Since a government is a coercive monopoly, the notion of more than one government occupying the same area at the same time is ridiculous. But a laissez-faire society would involve not governments, but private businesses operating in a free market. All actions have specific consequences, and the nature of these consequences is determined by the nature of the action and by the context in which it takes place. What would be the consequences for a free market defense company which committed an act of aggression in a laissez-faire society? Suppose, for example, that the old reliable defense company, acting on behalf of a client who had been robbed of his wallet, sent its agents to break into and search every house in the client's neighborhood. Suppose further that the agents shot the first man who offered resistance, taking his resistance as proof of guilt. The most immediate consequence of the aggression is that the defense company either does or does not realize its objective, in this case, the return of the wallet, together with damages, depending on the circumstances and the amount of counterforce it meets with. But this is only the first of several important consequences springing directly from the aggression. Not only has Old Reliable's action put it in the precarious position of being a target of retaliatory force, it has also made the company the subject of severe business ostracism. All honest and productive individuals and businesses will immediately disassociate themselves from Old Reliable, because they will fear that any disagreement which may arise in their business dealings with it may turn its aggressive force against them. Further, they will realize that even if they manage to remain on good terms with Old Reliable, they are in danger of becoming accidental casualties when retaliatory force is exercised by some indignant victim of Old Reliable's aggressions. But there is an even stronger reason which will persuade Old Reliable's customers and business associates to quickly sever all relations with it. In a laissez-faire society, as has been pointed out, a good reputation is the most valuable asset any business or individual can have. In a free society, a man with a bad reputation would have a hard time getting customers, business associates, or credit and insurance at rates he could afford. Knowing this, no one would wish to risk his personal reputation or the business reputation of his firm by having any dealings with a known aggressor. And we'll wrap it up right there at the bottom of page 256, reading 10 minutes-ish a day from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And we'll see you another day.